Hello guys, today I'm going to be doing a video on The Last of Us Part 1 with the RTX 2070, and we're going to be setting it off at 1080p at the high settings. So going to the options menu and the graphics, playing the game at 1080p and at the high preset. There we go with that, looking good. Let's jump into it and see what we can get. Now keep in mind that this game is very CPU intensive, so if you've got a weaker CPU than this, your FPS might fall below 60 FPS. Even though your GPU can handle it, your FPS could be sitting in the 40s and 30s. In areas with a lot of AI or a lot of or in those more CPU intensive areas again. This game at the high settings looks fantastic in my opinion. Playing at the low settings or medium settings looks pretty bad. I guess the low settings mainly. It looks very blurry and I don't like to look at all. It looks like a PS3 game. But medium settings it's much better. It's more in focus, but at times it will look blurry. So yeah, that's why I went ahead and skipped past the medium and low settings straight to the high settings. This GPU can obviously handle it. We can get 60 FPS most of the time. But occasionally we will fall down into the 50s or even the low 50s, which isn't ideal. But for a game like this, honestly, 50 to 60 FPS is plenty. It's still very playable. It's not ideal obviously, but this game is very intensive on your GPU and CPU. So at some point you're going to make some sacrifices. So you either go with the quality or you go with performance. Now we'll be going ahead and using DLSS as well. But from my experience at 1080p, for a card like this, I would personally skip it. But if you've got a 3050 or a GPU in that tier, then obviously it makes much more sense to use DLSS than to play at native 1080p at a low frame rate. Okay, here we are in the little pond area, or I guess the lake that's on this road. As you saw, FPS was falling down into the low 50s. Again, the game wasn't stuttering or lagging, it was feeling fine. It's not as responsive obviously in the low 50s versus the 60s and 70s, but just playing the game normally on keyboard and mouse, it's still playable. And if you've got a controller, obviously it will feel much better with aim assist and the smoothness of the sticks. So you also have that option as well if you want to go with that route. Okay, let's go ahead and enable DLSS. Gonna use the quality preset and I'll show you guys how it looks and how it performs. Alright, and here we are in the same location with DLSS at the quality preset, and now we're sitting in the 70s instead of the mid 50s, which is fantastic. And as you can see, the game does look pretty good for the most part. We don't really get too much blurring happening, but as I'm moving around you'll see that it becomes far more obvious, and the foliage mainly goes out of focus and becomes blurry a little bit. So if you don't mind this, then obviously it's definitely a viable choice for you. You should be able to get 60 FPS at all times with this, but again you're losing a bit of quality for that extra performance. So it's really up to you if you want to go with this. I personally would skip it and just go with 50 to 60 FPS instead. The game looks a bit sharper in my opinion, and I just like the look a lot better. But again, if you want the FPS, then go with this instead. But let's go ahead and play a little bit in the level as well, so we can get an average FPS with DLSS. But like standing right here, that brick wall was out of focus the whole way up. And now that I'm standing still, it looks very sharp and very good, just like native 1080p. So look, see, as I'm moving around, see that? Goes out of focus and then comes back in. That's the main issue with DLSS at 1080p in this game. In some games it looks fine, it looks amazing at 1080p, but in this game, that's just not the case. Now I'm just going to repeat myself one more time. I've gone ahead and played the entire game. I finished the whole thing on a 5800X 2D, which is basically a 12th Gen i7 or 12th Gen i9. And even with that CPU, my FPS would fall down into the 60s occasionally. It was pretty rare, but it was still happening. So if you got a lower T CPU, your FPS will fall way lower. Now playing the game at 440p at the high settings. Let's go and jump into the settings real quick. Options, display, and now we're in the red in the VRAM side, guys. Sitting at 9.6 gigs out of 8. Not looking too good. And as a result of this, the game will be stuttering far more, and it will feel far more choppy as well. Look at that. Falling into the 20s now, very easily. The game is stuttering far more often as well. Look at that, it's freezing up every couple of seconds. Panning the camera around, it's causing the game to freeze up. We went from sitting in the 50s and 60s to now sitting in the 30s, and the game is stuttering every couple of seconds. So the high settings is a bit too much for this card, FPS wise and VRAM wise. But lowering the quality of the game will fix this issue, and using DLSS as well should help us out quite a bit, which I'll try it in a second. So yeah, by default at the high settings we're going to be sitting in the mid 20s up into the mid 30s and 40s. The game, FPS wise, it's doing mostly fine, but again the stuttering is just far too much and the game doesn't play well at all on a keyboard and mouse. But let's go ahead and enable DLSS at the balanced preset and run it back one more time and see how it looks then. Alright, and this is the game at the high settings with balanced DLSS. We're going to be sitting in the 50s and 60s now, so the same as 1080p. The grass is bugging out there, look at this, it's taking a while to load in. Did you guys see that? That took forever to render in. That does not look good at all, guys. And looking back, we're going to be falling down into the mid 40s still. So not too good. I think at this point playing at the medium settings might be the way to go. Your FPS will be higher and should be a lot easier on the VRAM side of things as well, because right now I think we're in the yellow. Yeah, we're definitely in the yellow, using up 9 gigs out of 8, so not good still. But overall, the stuttering has definitely calmed down quite a bit. It's not as aggressive as the high settings, but still the performance isn't fully there yet. So again, sitting in the 40s and 50s on average, and boosts up into the 60s in those easier scenes. Okay, medium settings. Let's go into options. In the graphics, we're now in the white on the VRAM side of things, which is good. And this is the medium settings. There we go. And FPS wise, we're going to be sitting in the 60s, the mid 60s. But let's go ahead and run all the way back, and we'll see how it looks and how it runs. And looking back, we're going to be falling just into the 50s, the high 50s. So we're pretty much 2 FPS off, sitting in the 60s, which is fine. But let's go and play for a little bit, and we'll see if the stuttering will come back or if it's going to be a smooth experience. But I think at this point it should be very smooth. The FPS will fall into the 50s unfortunately, but I think again, for this kind of card, it's more than enough to have a good time playing this game. Okay, going indoors, I'm going to be sitting in the 70s, which is fine. Getting a bit of weird, what is that, like flickering? We are getting a bit of flickering going on underneath the statue there, if you guys can see. If I zoom in, it goes away, but if I zoom out again, it comes back in, and it's very distracting. Looks pretty awful as well. Did you guys see that? FPS was falling down into the 50s there. And I'm playing on the lowest difficulty for this video, so I'm getting aim assist. I didn't know that was a thing. It's pretty funny. Look at that. But anyway, we are falling down to the 50s right here. But again, aiming at 50 FPS feels fine, to be honest. Okay, finally, let's go and play the game at 4K at the medium settings, no DLSS, and see how the game performs. Alright guys, and this is the 4K experience with the RTX 2070. We're going to be sitting in the 20s. Not great. The game looks incredibly sharp though. It looks amazing. But yeah, sitting in the low 20s is a movie-like experience, but it's not a playable experience. It's pretty awful. But I've seen the FPS go as low as like 5. The VRAM, there we go. It's happening. It's happening. 2 FPS, guys. Yep. Ah, there we go. We hit our limit. So yeah, overall at 4K, you're going to be sitting at 2 to 5 FPS on average. If the game is running properly, you're going to be getting 20 FPS. But it's just too much for this card. This game is just intensive as it is, so playing at 4K with this tier of card will just kill it. So again, 2 FPS right here. The game is running like trash. But at 440p and 1080p, it runs perfectly fine. I think it's definitely playable. 4K, I guess you could play the low settings with DLSS, but at that point the game will look very blurry anyway. So honestly, it's not really worth using. But yeah. That's about it guys, thank you guys for watching, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys next time for the next video. See you guys there.